In a packed courtroom, a white cop slapped a disabled black boy right in front of the judge. Jalen Ward, just 14, and barely able to walk, said nothing. That silence cost him his dignity and almost his future. But what no one in that room knew, especially the cop, was that the man sitting quietly in the back wasn't just a relative. He was Jalen's father. And he wasn't just anyone. He ran covert missions for the CIA. So, what happens when power doesn't yell, but waits for the perfect moment to strike? Comment below and let's step into the story that left a courtroom frozen. The courtroom was too quiet for a place that just had a child dragged into it. You heard the cuff's first metal clinking against bone before you saw the boy. Jalen Ward, 14, black, wearing a hoodie 2 sizes too big, limped into courtroom 2B with one shoe dragging behind the other. His left leg didn't work right. He moved like every step reminded him he didn't belong. But that wasn't what made people stare. It was the silence. He didn't say a word, didn't cry, didn't plead. Not once. The bailiff barked docket 5 Jalen Ward loitering near Roosevelt Middle as if he was calling up a serial offender. Jalen looked down at the floor, expression unreadable. The cuffs were too tight for a kid his size. His charge loitering near his own school. He'd been sitting outside the gate waiting for his ride. A call came into 911 suspicious. Blackmail near school property. That was enough. Officer Kyle Rohr arrived and cuffed him before asking a single question. Now they were here and no one in the room looked surprised. Officer Kyle Rohr stood tall, chest puffed, lips curled in that way men smile when they're too sure they're right. He didn't look at Jalen. He looked at the judge. Judge Marjorie Harland, mid-60s, white, clean-cut, polished, sharp around the eyes. Her voice was neutral, but her pauses always landed heavy like warning shots. She scanned the paperwork slowly, then removed her glasses. Loitering, failure to comply, refusal to speak. So, at Jalen. You're 14, Jalen didn't answer. Mr. Ward, she said again, slightly sharper this time. Do you understand where you are? Still nothing. He shifted his. Wait. The cuffs clinked. Neil Cooper, the court-appointed attorney, leaned down, forced a smile. Answer, yes, ma'am. Okay, just once. Jalen didn't move. The judge sighed. Is he mute? No, Your Honor, said clearly annoyed. He's just unresponsive. Rohr jumped in louder then. He needed to be. He's been like that the whole time. Didn't say a word when I asked for ID. Just sat there staring. That's why I had to take control of the situation. Darius shifted in his seat in the back. He was the only one who moved. Darius King listed in court as the boy's guardian sat silent, hands folded, eyes sharp, worn denim jacket, boots still muddy. No one paid him much attention. Most assumed he was just another tired uncle. But there was something about the way he watched, like he was calculating. The air between people, like he knew the room better than it knew itself. Harlan tapped her pen on the desk twice. Officer Rohr, did he resist? Ma'am. Not physically. Just didn't follow verbal commands such as I told him to identify himself. He didn't. I told him to stand. He just sat there. Gave him 3 warnings and then I restrained him for safety. A scoff echoed from the back. It wasn't Darius. It was a woman, Mrs. Sanders. Mid-50s community volunteer, seated behind the bar. That boy couldn't threaten a fly, she muttered. Just have the size of that man. Judge Harlan slammed her gavel. One more outburst, and you'll be removed. The courtroom fell silent again, but something in the air shifted. The tension had found a crack and was starting to pour in. Judge Harlan turned back to Jalen. Man, you are in a court of law. You are expected to participate in your own. Now, do you have anything to say? The pause? Long one. Then Jalen blinked once and looked up not at the judge but at Rohr. And for the first time he spoke. Quiet even. Just 3 words. Is this normal? The courtroom froze. Even Rohr flinched just barely. Judge Harlan narrowed her. Excuse me. Jalen's voice didn't rise. Getting arrested for sitting. Getting hit for staying quiet. Is this what people expect? Neil tried to interrupt. Let's not. But the judge raised a hand. Roar straightened tone. Defensive. Don't twist this. You didn't respond. That's suspicious behavior. Jalen tilted his head. Silence is now a crime. That was when Darius leaned forward, hands still folded, still quiet, but the look in his eyes said more than words. The courtroom had shifted, and no one knew it yet. But Darius did. He'd seen what happened when power goes unchecked, and he hadn't come here today to watch. He came to end it. Jalen stood still. Not stubborn, not scared, just still. The cuffs had left faint red marks on his wrists, and the courtroom lights made them look worse than they were. But it was his silence that filled the air like smoke, thick, uncomfortable, hard to ignore. Officer Kyle Rohr stepped closer, boots tapping sharply against the cold tile, his jaw clenched, his lips curled in that familiar smirk, the one that always came before something went too far. He leaned in, voice low. You think this is a joke, boy? You think I'm playing with you? Jalen didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't breathe. Neil Cooper, the court-appointed defense attorney, cleared his throat. His chair squeaked as he shifted awkwardly. He opened his mouth, then shut it again. It wasn't paid enough to get involved. Kyle's voice rose now, cutting across the quiet courtroom. I said, answer me. What were you doing outside that school? Jalen just looked ahead, his lips. The pause, then crack. The slap echoed like a gunshot. Kyle's palm connected with Jalen's cheek, whipping his head sideways. A sharp red mark bloomed instantly across the boy's face. Jalen staggered just slightly, but he didn't fall. He didn't cry out. He didn't speak. He just slowly turned his head back to center. His lip trembled, but not from pain, not from fear, from disbelief. The courtroom froze. No one moved. No one spoke. And then from the gallery, voice rose, sharp, quivering, furious. You slapped a disabled child. What? Woman stood mid-50s, tight gray bun and a church dress. Mrs. Sanders. She pointed straight at Kyle. What the hell is wrong with you? He can't even stand straight. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. You're supposed to protect people, not abuse them. That's someone's son. The judge didn't blink, didn't move. Mrs. Sanders turned to her fellow bystanders. You all saw that and you're just going to sit there. Two guards began to approach her. She stood her ground. Don't touch me, she snapped. I'm walking out on my own, but let me say this first. If this is what justice looks like now, I want no part of it. And then softer, almost to herself. He's just a put. As she was escorted out, her words hung in the air like smoke that wouldn't clear. The silence after was worse than the slap itself. Sharp, brittle, unnatural. The judge, Marjorie Harland, finally looked up, but not at Kyle, not at Jalen, at her clock. She scribbled something meaningless on her notepad, then cleared her throat. Proceed. That was all. Neil Cooper leaned toward Jalen, voice barely whisper. You okay? Jalen didn't look at him. He didn't look at anyone. In his mind, he heard his mother's voice, soft, firm, tired. Never let them see you cry, Jay. His lip bled slightly, but he didn't wipe it. It just swallowed hard. At the back of the room, Darius King hadn't moved. So, sitting, still silent, but his hands gripping the edge of the wooden bench, had started to shake. Not with fear, with restraint. His knuckles turned pale, his jaw set tight. The room didn't notice him, didn't want to notice him, but he noticed everything. Kyle's proud smirk, the judge's disinterest, the cowardice on Neil's face, and the pain behind his son's still eyes. One breath in, one breath out. He could still feel the weight of a satellite phone in his hands, hear the voice codes, see the men he once led into enemy territory without backup, without fear. That world had taught him precision. But this was something else. It was personal. And as the hearing resumed, Darius didn't look away. His eyes were locked on Kyle Rohr, and deep inside them, something old and cold began to stir. That night, Jalen didn't sleep. In bed with one earbud in, staring at the ceiling. The audio file he'd played 100 times was looping again, the same scratchy clip that barely ran 15 seconds. It was his own voice. Childlike, unsure, recorded months ago. Testing. This is Jalen Ward. I'm trying this again. A pause, then a whisper. I don't know who my dad is, but maybe he's someone. And a file. He used to pretend that sending the audio into the void like a message in a bottle might lead to an answer, but nothing ever came back. Outside, a car passed by its headlight, slicing through the cracks in the blinds. He pulled open the drawer beside his bed and reached in slowly. Beneath an old comic book hidden inside a weathered shoebox was the only piece of his mother he had left a photo. She wore her Marine uniform like armor, smiling with tired eyes. One hand rested on the shoulder of a baby in a hospital blanket him. Beside the photo was something else, something he didn't look at often. A CIA badge, tarnished, worn, but real. He didn't know where it came from, only that it used to belong to someone she trusted, maybe even loved. Jalen stared at the badge, running a thumb over the faded gold lettering. He'd asked Darius once before years ago about his father. The man had deflected, changed the subject, said he wasn't one to dwell on ghosts. But tonight, the silence was louder than ever. Jalen walked quietly into the living room, dragging his left leg slightly. Darius sat in the corner chair reading a file, something in code probably. He didn't look up. Jalen didn't speak right away. He just stood there until finally he asked, "Did you know him?" Darius looked up slowly. "Who?" "My father." A long beat, then another. Jalen held up the badge, not as a weapon, but a question. "I found this in Mom's stuff. She always said he was a hero, a ghost, someone important. But she never said a name." Darius leaned back, exhaled through his nose. "She wasn't wrong," he said softly. "So you knew him?" A nod. Jalen pressed harder. "Then why never tell me?" Darius closed the file on his lap and rested it on the table. "Because knowing someone's name doesn't always help you understand who they are," he said. "Sometimes the truth changes things." Jalen's jaw clenched. "That's not fair." Darius agreed. "It's not." There was something different in his tone now. Cold, not harsh, but tired. Like a man who had walked too far, carrying too. "You think I didn't want to tell you?" Darius continued. "You think it was easy watching you grow up with questions I couldn't answer. Then why didn't you?" Jalen's voice cracked. Darius looked at him carefully. "You never asked." That hit harder than the slap in court. Jalen stepped back, shaking his head. "That's not true. I asked you 100 times. You just didn't want to say it because I didn't know if you'd be safer with the truth or without it." Jalen held up the photo. "You think I'm safer with this? A ghost? A mystery? People look at me like I'm broken at school, at court, even today. You saw what that cop did and you just sat there." Darius's eyes darkened. "Think sitting still means doing nothing?" He said, voice low. "You think silence means surrender?" Jalen didn't respond. "I saw what happened," Darius said. "I saw everything. And believe me, Jay, that man has no idea what he just stepped into." The room went quiet. Then Jalen sat down across from him. Softly he asked, "Was he like you?" Darius paused. "No," he said finally. "It was more and less. He made choices. Some good, some he never forgave himself for, but when it mattered, he did the right thing." "Did he love her?" "He never stopped." Jalen blinked. "Did he love me?" Darius didn't answer right away. Then more than his own name. They sat in silence after that. Not heavy, not awkward, just still. Jalen leaned back, looking again at the badge. And for the first time, it didn't feel like a dead end. It felt like a beginning. It was just past midnight when Darius's phone lit up with a name he hadn't seen in over a decade. Nolan Reyes. He didn't answer right away. Just stared at the screen at that name pulsing like a warning flare from another life. It finally picked up. Still burning the midnight oil came a voice grawly familiar but sharper than he remembered. Only when ghosts called, Darius replied quietly. There was a long pause. Nolan said, "It's out. The video, the slap. It hit local news an hour ago. It's going national." Darius didn't even blink. "How bad?" "Worse than you'd guess. Civil rights blogs picked it up and someone recognized you sitting in the back. Not by name yet, but it won't take. Some folks at Langley already talking, saying, 'Didn't King go dark?'" Darius closed his eyes. What do they want? What they always want. Nolan sighed to know if one of their ghosts just came back from the dead. Darius said nothing. Nolan hesitated, then softened. If you're really done hiding, now's the time to say it, because they'll come knocking and not for tea." "I'm not ready to talk," Darius muttered. "I wasn't asking you to talk, Nolan. I was asking if you're ready to fight." Silence. Then click. Darius ended the call. He stood slowly across the room in bare feet, past the shelf of framed photos, one of Jalen on his tricycle, another of a woman in fatigues, her smile the only light in that uniform. He reached the back wall and knelt by the old floor safe. Hadn't opened it in over a decade. His hand hovered over the keypad. JALE N06. The door clicked. Inside lay a single manila folder, one faded photo, one clearance badge, and a name he hadn't spoken aloud since the day he vanished. Commander Darius King, Central Intelligence Agency, Black Cell Unit, Level 9. Clearance. The badge still smelled faintly of dust and steel. His face stared back 10 years. Younger, eyes colder. Underneath the ID operation hollow frame, that was the last time he'd been activated. A covert rescue in Syria. 4 hostages, including a U.S. diplomat, an embedded double agent leaking locations, no backup, no margin for her. They made it out, but his wife didn't. The debrief had said friendly fire, but Darius knew better. They were burned before boots even hit the sand. He'd carried her body out himself. No ceremony, no press, just silence. And in that silence, he'd made the only decision that ever felt like truth. He quit. Not officially, ghosts don't get resignations. He disappeared, faked death, burned papers, took custody of Jalen as guardian, not father, hid in plain sight. Enemies, he once said, look for bloodlines, not birth certificates. It worked for a time until a courtroom cop named Kyle Rohr raised his hand. That slap across Jalen's face hit Darius too. Harder than any ambush, any bullet, because this enemy didn't wear a foreign flag or shout in Arabic. He wore blue. He smiled. He called it justice. Darius shut the safe and locked it again. But inside something had come undone. He returned to the table and sat. In the quiet, his eyes settled on Jalen's sleeping form on the couch. Peaceful, unaware, he whispered aloud more to himself than anyone. Darius King. It didn't feel strange. It didn't feel dangerous. It felt earned. His mind slipped back to the moment he first held Jalen in his arms. His wife, bruised but beaming, had whispered, "He's got your silence. God help him." He had kept the silence all these years. Shielded Jalen from headlines, enemies, and shadows. But maybe now, maybe God needed him loud. He picked up the badge. Let it rest in his palm. From the other room, a small voice startled him. "Uncle D." Darius turned. Jalen stood in the doorway, one sock missing, rubbing his eyes. "You okay?" the boy asked, blinking in the dark. Darius hesitated, then nodded. "Just thinking." Jalen shuffled closer. "You never sleep when you think." Smile tugged at Darius's lips. "Go back to bed, son." Jalen paused, then asked almost too softly, "Uncle D, did you ever do something bad?" But for a good reason. Darius stared at him, the words catching somewhere deep, then finally whispered, "Yeah, once." The boy nodded like he understood more than he was supposed to, then turned and disappeared back into the shadows. Darius stayed there, holding the badge, eyes burning with memories and something sharper. Resolve. The kind that doesn't fade. The kind that wakes the dead. Most revolutions don't start with a roar. They start with A single click. That's how this one began. Deep in the basement server room of County Hall, where Bryce Lemand, youngest IT analyst on the payroll, stayed late to run routine system checks. Except that night, something wasn't routine. Buried inside the backup logs, Bryce noticed a red flag entry. Marked Media Suppression Protocol flagged for Auto Dion. It shouldn't have been there. No one outside federal agencies even had access to that protocol. Curious, Bryce ran a restoration sweep. It took 2 minutes. Then there it was. Grainy footage courtroom angle. The courtroom. That moment. A teenage black boy in cuffs. A white cop towering over him. And then the slap. Filtered, unedited, raw. Bryce didn't blink. He just watched the entire room freeze on screen. He checked the system activity log. Someone had tried to delete it 12 minutes after the incident. Name redacted, untraceable. But the motive was clear. Cover up. Bryce knew he shouldn't move the file. He knew forwarding it violated every contract clause he'd signed. He also knew something darker. If he didn't, the whole thing would be buried. So quietly, he uploaded it to an anonymous account on Liberty Chain, a civil rights forum that had leaked police body cam footage in the past. He added a single line of caption. He never raised a hand. And this is what they did. Patch justice. For Jalen. At 2:14 a.m. the post went live. By 3:42 a.m. it had 12,000 shares. By 6 o'clock a.m. the hashtag justice for Jalen was trending nationwide on X, formerly Twitter, igniting debates, protests, and think pieces. The world saw it and couldn't unsee it. Mainstream networks picked it up by mid-morning. Talk shows played the footage on loop. Civil rights lawyers called for immediate investigation. Public schools released statements about inclusive community values. And someone at the Department of Justice made a quiet phone call to Internal Affairs. But in a quiet corner of the courthouse, Kyle Rohr wasn't impressed. He watched the clip on a borrowed phone, jaw tight, fists clenched. By noon, he was storming through the employee parking lot straight to the back office where Bryce usually kept to himself. He found the kid at his desk typing nervously. "Right, well, man," Kyle said, leaning on the cubicle edge like a cobra, coiled and smiling. "Mind if we talk?" Bryce turned startled. "Officer Rohr." Kyle crouched beside him, voice low. "You don't know what you just started," he said. "The footage. That was an internal record classified. Someone like you doesn't survive messing with things like that." Bryce's throat tightened. It was already someone tried to delete it. Kyle leaned in so close Bryce could smell the breath mints. That someone knew what was best. "You don't." And then, with a smirk, Kyle added, "You're young. Maybe you disappear for a while. Maybe take a sabbatical. Clear your head. Out of state somewhere far." Bryce froze. Cut. Straightened. "Or we'll help you disappear one way or another." He walked away. The next morning, Bryce Lemand was gone. No resignation, no phone call, just an empty apartment mailbox overflowing and a neighbor who swore he saw Bryce packing bags at 3 a.m. like someone was chasing him. Official word, personal leave, unofficial. They silenced him. But what Kyle didn't know, what nobody expected, was that Bryce had left behind a backup. Not just the video, but everything. System logs, IP traces, deleted records, names. Uploaded the entire log set to a secure cloud node connected to an encrypted watchdog server, one with only a few approved recipients. One of those was tagged decaying former asset. Internal clearance authorized. That ping reached Darius within the hour. When he opened the file, his breath caught. It wasn't just a courtroom slap anymore. It was evidence. It was systemic. It was rot. And now it was traceable. He read the metadata. Clear indicators the footage had been intentionally buried by someone with access. Credentials far above Kyle's rank. Someone inside the judiciary or worse, the district office. Darius didn't waste time. He zipped the entire folder, added his own encrypted signature, and pushed it directly to the Internal Affairs investigation portal. The one that bypassed local routing, The one that didn't ask questions until after things blew up. Then he sat back, heart pounding, hands cold. The system was starting to crack. Not because of noise, but because someone dared to listen. The courtroom was colder that morning, not from the weather, but from something unspoken in the air. A tension that clung to every breath. Kyle Rohr sat with a look of confidence that bordered on arrogance, his uniform crisp boots polished like mirrors. If he was worried about the video, he didn't show it. Your Honor, he began smoothly. The boy, Jalen Ward, was uncooperative. He refused verbal commands. Based on prior reports in his history of loitering and aggression, Darius didn't move. He sat one row behind Jalen, still the guardian. Still the quiet shadow, Kyle continued, voice rising. He has a record of resisting being combative. Officers in this department have filed complaints before. That's a lie, a voice interrupted. Eyes turned to the defense table. Neil Cooper had barely spoken all morning. But now the public defender leaned forward, his voice steadier than it had been in any prior hearing. What's that? Counselor Heron asked, arching an eyebrow. Cooper held up a sheet of paper. Freshly printed. We've reviewed the juvenile records. Jalen has 0 prior incidents. In fact, the only thing on file is perfect school attendance before the accident that injured his leg. Kyle's smile twitched, his eyes narrowing. He was a threat. Cooper didn't flinch. The threat. He's 14, disabled, sitting alone near a school he once attended. That's not a threat, officer. That's a child. Judge Harland held up a hand. Let's keep this orderly. But Darius stood. He didn't raise his. He didn't need to. I'd like the court to examine Exhibit C, he said calmly, placing a folder in Cooper's. It's an internal affairs document from another jurisdiction. The concerns. Officer Rohr. Judge Harland hesitated, then nodded. Let's see it. Cooper opened. Then froze. Inside was a report Officer Kyle Rohr suspended 2 years ago. In New Mexico. Excessive force against a Hispanic teenager. The boy had a broken wrist. Charges were dropped after the family moved states. No formal conviction, but the department had strongly recommended termination. This wasn't disclosed in his employment here, Cooper muttered. Kyle turned pale. The court was unaware of this record. Judge Harland said, her voice quieter now, her fingers gripped the bench, knuckles whitening. Officer Rohr, is this true? Paul tried to recover. It was investigated. The kid had a knife. It was the knife was a butter knife from his lunch tray, Darius said flatly. How do you know that? Snapped. Darius met his eyes for the first time. I read the report. Thoroughly. A longer silence fell. In the back of the room, the clerk shuffled papers nervously. I'm calling a 30-minute recess, Judge. Harland said. We'll reconvene to discuss whether this new information warrants a reassessment of Officer Rohr's testimony. Her voice trembled slightly as she banged the gavel. As the room emptied, Cooper looked at Darius. Where did you get that file? Darius didn't. He simply walked past Kyle, close enough to whisper. You think you're still safe behind that badge? He said softly. But you have no idea who you just dragged into this room. Kyle turned to watch him leave, jaw tight. But something in his eyes shifted for the first time. The confidence cracked. At the bench, Heron remained seated long after the room cleared. Her hand trembled slightly as she reread the report. Somewhere in the back of her mind, a thought itched. Who is this man? And more importantly, what else is he holding back? The courtroom had settled into a strained kind of quiet, the kind that comes after too many truths have been laid bare, but no one knows what to do with them. Everyone waited for the next move, the next voice. It was Judge Harlan who finally broke the stillness. Jalen, she said gently, her tone softer than anyone had ever heard it. If you'd like, you can speak. The court is listening. Jalen blinked. First he didn't move. His hands were clenched around the hem of his jacket, his leg trembling beneath him, not from fear, but from the strain of standing with a brace too tight and old. He looked back at Darius, just a quiet nod, nothing. Then slowly, painfully, Jalen stood and limped toward the witness. Each step echoed. When he reached the front, the bailiff instinctively moved to help him up onto the platform. Jalen refused with a soft shake of the head. He gripped the edge and pulled himself up. The room held its breath. His voice when it came was barely above a whisper. But it was there. "I'm not mute," he said. "I just stopped trying." No one moved. "I used to talk a lot. I used to raise my hand in class. But things to say." His voice cracked. He steadied it. "But every time I spoke, someone talked over me or laughed or told me I was wrong or stared at my leg. Like that's all I am." The pause. "Then I'm not stupid. I see it. The way people look when they think someone doesn't matter." He looked straight at Kyle. "You thought I didn't matter." Kyle shifted in his seat. "Truth is, I didn't say anything that day." Jalen continued. "Because I knew it wouldn't make a difference. Not to you. Not to the people who look at me and see a problem instead of a person." His gaze swept the room, resting last on the judge. "Didn't speak," he said, voice rising just slightly. "Because no one ever listens. And I'm tired of screaming inside." In the hallway just outside the courtroom, Mrs. Sanders stood with her phone clutched to her chest, eyes glossy. She had been following every update since being removed from the hearing. When the live stream reached Jalen's testimony, she froze. Then she broke down, sobbing. Inside, no one interrupted. Jalen kept going softer. "You want to know what I want?" he asked. "I want to walk outside and not be afraid of who's watching. I want to go to school without people asking where my dad is. I want to sit by a gate and not get arrested. I want to be seen. Really seen." He stepped down from the stand, slowly limping back to his seat. The silence clung even tighter than before. And then the sound of a single sniffle. Then two. Even the court reporter paused, eyes damp. That clip, just 83 seconds long, was uploaded to Twitter within the hour. No one knew who first shared it, but by sundown it had already been viewed over 400,000 times. The caption under nearly every repost was the same. "He finally spoke and we all heard it." Courtroom was holding its breath. Then the doors flung open. 3 federal agents entered. No hesitation, no apologies. Their dark suits cut sharp lines through the stillness. One flashed a badge, raising his voice over the tension. "Special Agent Marcus Vega, Office of Inspector General. We're here to deliver a federal unsealing order. Immediate effect." All heads turned to Darius King. Still sitting, still quiet. The man in question is registered under the name Darius King. Vega continued, but his real identity is classified under Federal Intelligence Protocol. The classification ends today. Gasps broke out like thunder rippling under skin. "This man," Vega said, turning slowly to the judge, "served as Chief Strategic Commander for the CIA's Black Cell Division. Code name Argo. Clearance Alpha, 12 years active. 5 covert operations saved American lives without a trace. He left the agency after losing his wife in Operation Silent Thorn. We unseal him today because this case compromised everything he gave up to protect." The words hit like a punch to the ribs. Kyle Rohr, who had been reclining just moments ago, now stiffened like a statue made of shame. "What the hell is this?" he muttered under his breath, eyes darting for an exit. His palms were sweating. The judge blinked once, then again. Her lips moved, but no words came. For the gavel, then stopped midway. "Is this some kind of mistake?" Whispered not to the room, but to herself. Even the bailiffs looked frozen. This man," whispered a juror. "He's just been sitting there all along. Been protecting someone." Another murmured. "The boy." Jalen sat still, his hands folded tightly, his body tense, but his eyes locked on Darius. "You lied to me," Jalen said quietly. "All this time, you were more than just my guardian." Darius rose. His coat fell behind his shoulders like the closing of a curtain. No badge, no gun, just the weight of history in his stare. He looked at the boy not with guilt, but with sorrow carved deep into his jaw. I didn't lie, Darius said, voice low and steady. I just chose silence. But Jalen's voice cracked. Why didn't you ever tell me? Darius looked at him, looked through him. Because heroes die. Jalen, he said, and I couldn't afford to be one if it meant losing you too. The room was so silent even the walls seemed to hold back sound. The prosecutor, his face pale, stood up and addressed the court shakily. Your Honor, the state respectfully withdraws from this case effective immediately pending federal jurisdiction review. We had no knowledge of this background nor the circumstances surrounding Mr. King or the minor. He sat back down like his legs had stopped working. Jalen rose from his chair. His voice trembled, but his words were. So, all this time, I thought I was just a problem, a mistake. I didn't. But I came from something that's strong. Darius turned to face the courtroom, no longer invisible. You saw me as a shadow, he said, his voice calm. But the truth I helped build. The light you hide behind. Judge Harlan finally spoke barely above. A whisper. I didn't know. Darius's eyes narrowed. Sharp and unmoved. You didn't want to. Silence. The woman in the back began to clap. Slow, steady, Mrs. Sanders. One by one, others followed. Not applause for victory, but for truth surviving the silence. Outside those courtroom walls, the internet was already on fire. Darius King, the boy who spoke. Black cell unsealed. And one headline spreading faster than any others. CIA commander sacrifices. Identity to defend. Disabled black teen reveals he's the father. Courtroom sat in a rare stillness as if even the walls were listening. Darius hadn't said a word since revealing who he was, but he didn't have to. The name Darius King had already done what no raised voice could. It stirred every unspoken rule, every hidden file, every blind eye that had looked away for far too long. By the end of the week, the impact began to show. Investigators launched a full audit into Judge Harlan's docket. They found scent tremors through the entire system. 37 cases over the past 4 years where children of color, particularly with learning or physical disabilities, had been fast-tracked through juvenile court with limited legal counsel and questionable police testimony. Many of those cases had one name in common, Officer Kyle Rohr. He was arrested within 48 hours. No press conference, no warning, just 2 federal agents showing up at his home in the early morning telling him to put his badge down this time for good. Led him to the car. Someone in the neighborhood filmed it on their phone. The clip went viral before sunrise. Kyle's once proud glare had cracked. His voice trembled as he muttered, I was just doing my job. But no one clapped. No one nodded. The world had changed. Overnight. In the courtroom, Prosecutor Neil Cooper requested to speak. He stood, shoulders heavier than before, eyes not on the bench, but on the floor. I didn't hit that boy, he began. I didn't threaten him or mock him. But I also didn't stand up when I should have. I didn't speak when silence made me safe. And that he paused, swallowing hard, that may be the worst harm I've ever caused. Jalen was in the room when Cooper said that, sitting quietly, legs crossed his cane resting beside him. He didn't say anything, but he nodded. And in that simple movement, something passed between them. Not forgiveness, but maybe the start of understanding. Outside the courthouse, crowds gathered every day. Some held up signs. Silence isn't neutral. He spoke for all of us. And many simply said, justice for Jalen. But Darius, he stayed away from the spotlight. The CIA sent 2 high-ranking officials requesting a private conversation. They offered full reinstatement clearance, upgrades, and even a custom role within the AY's internal ethics review unit. It listened, then shook his head. I'm not here to clean their house anymore, he said. I'm here to build one for my son. He left the meeting without a second glance. Not because he didn't care, but because his war had changed. The battlefield wasn't Syria or Berlin anymore. It was a school hallway, courtroom. A boy's silence mistaken for weakness. That silence, though, had started something bigger than anyone expected. 2 weeks later, a statewide bill called Jalen's Act was introduced and passed in record time. The bill protected the rights of children with developmental delays and physical disabilities in court. It required a specially trained advocate be present for every minor with diagnosed impairments and mandated all courtroom proceedings involving such children be recorded, reviewed, and audited annually. At the signing ceremony, Jalen stood with his hand in Darius's. His voice had grown stronger, not louder, but firmer. He read aloud the first lines of the act to a room of lawmakers and families. Every child deserves to be heard, even if they don't speak like you, even if they're afraid to speak at all. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Even Mrs. Sanders, who had been dragged out of court weeks before for standing up, was invited. She held Jalen's other hand. "You gave me back my faith," she whispered. "Not in the system. People." As for Kyle, he sat in a prison cell awaiting trial, not just for Jalen's case, but for multiple counts of misconduct, false reporting, and child endangerment. Some of his former partners turned witnesses. Others resigned quietly. No one defended him anymore. One of the more haunting clips from the hearing came from a teenager named Ileliana, once processed through Kyle's report 2 years ago. Her voice was shaky as she testified. "They told me I was trouble because I talked too much. They said kids like me didn't deserve chances." Then she looked over at Jalen. But he didn't say a word, and they still tried to bury him. That line played on national news for days, but perhaps the most powerful image was captured a week later. It was quiet, unplanned. A local photographer caught Jalen and Darius walking past the courthouse. Just the two of them. Crowd, no fanfare. On the stone steps behind them, someone had painted in chalk, "Let silence never be mistaken for weakness again." The courtroom was packed, not with noise, not with chaos, just breathless anticipation. You could feel it in your chest like the air itself was holding its breath. Jalen sat beside Darius upright, his cane resting against the bench. His posture wasn't perfect, but it was firm, grounded. He wasn't hiding behind it anymore. He wasn't hiding behind anything. The judge took her time flipping pages, clearing her throat, glancing at the room like she knew the weight of what was coming. In the matter of State versus Jalen King, she began. This court finds the defendant not guilty on all charges. There was no outburst, no applause, just silence, pure and reverent. The kind of silence that didn't come from shock, but respect. Jalen didn't flinch. He took a slow breath and then did something no one expected. He stood, no help, no cane, no hand on his shoulder, just him. Every step he took was uneven but steady. Each one a quiet defiance against everything that had tried to break him. He turned toward the gallery, toward the very people who once stared at him with doubt or pity or indifference. This time they all stood, not by command, not because they were told, but because something in their spirit demanded it. A room full of people stood for a boy they once overlooked. Darius stepped beside him. He held something in his palm. Worn, familiar. The CIA badge. That same cold metal that once gave him the power to change nations now felt too heavy in his hand. "This used to be the only way I could be heard," he told Jalen. "But you," he paused, his voice tight. "You made them listen without needing this. Your voice is louder than mine ever was." Jalen looked down at the badge, then back at Darius. "I don't want it," he said, gently. "I just want you." Darius closed his eyes and nodded, slipping the badge back into his pocket for good. The two walked out of that courtroom together side by side. No guards, no press wall, just them. And as they reached the steps, Mrs. Sanders was there holding a small American flag and a sign that simply read, "He walked in alone. He walks out free." Jalen paused at the top of the stairs. Behind him, the doors slowly opened wider. More people began to step out. Former defendants, teachers, children with disabilities, Families holding signs with Jalen's face and the words, "We hear you now." Cameras clicked, but he didn't flinch. He didn't smile, either. He just nodded like he understood this moment was bigger than him. In the weeks that followed, news networks ran retrospectives. Commentators called him the boy who taught a nation to listen. Fools started naming classrooms and learning centers after him. But Jalen never gave interviews, never wrote a book, never took the stage. He had nothing left to prove. Instead, he returned to his small routines, going back to school therapy, late-night chess matches with Darius on the back porch. Sometimes people still asked Darius if he missed the old life. The missions, the adrenaline, the clearance codes. He always gave the same answer. "I live for the mission now, but it looks like breakfast at 6 o'clock and bedtime stories at 9 o'clock. One afternoon, months later, Darius found Jalen in the garage fixing the old wheelchair they used to take to court. It had been rusting in the corner. "You planning on using that again?" he asked with a smile. Jalen shook his head. "Nah, just wanted to clean it up." Then he paused. "Someone else might need it, but not like I did. Not because they were forced to." Darius didn't say anything. Just watched him, hands dusty, focused, quiet. The boy who used to hide in his own silence now stood comfortably inside it. And the world, it never quite went back to the way it was. Because when a courtroom full of people stands for a boy once ignored, something in the foundation changes, not all at once, but permanently. Somewhere a teacher thinks twice before labeling a child difficult. A cop pauses before raising his voice. A judge looks deeper before reaching for the gavel. In a country that often listens only to the loudest, one boy's silence became the sound that echoed the longest. And that was the story of a boy who didn't need to shout to be heard, because sometimes silence speaks louder than anything. The story isn't just about Jalen. It's about every child who's ever been overlooked. Every parent who chose love over legacy, and every system that needs to be reminded justice doesn't whisper. It demands to be heard. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you pause even for a moment, please give it a thumbs up. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss another powerful moment like this.